Most people recognize an abacus when they see one, a rectangular frame filled with rows or columns of movable beads. Today, it is sometimes treated as a children's toy or a classroom decoration. Historically, however, it was a serious calculating instrument used by merchants, government officials, teachers, tax collectors, and mathematicians. So we wanted to get into that on Things You Don't Know. So please join us for an interesting dive into this topic.
Dr. Weaver, the first question I have sounds simple but is very difficult to answer. Who invented the abacus? The most accurate answer from what I can find out is that no single inventor is known. The abacus developed gradually from earlier counting methods, and different versions appeared in several parts of the world. It is perhaps better understood as an idea that evolved across civilizations than as the invention of any one person.
Now, Dr. Dineen, that makes sense because the basic problem was universal. People needed to count livestock, measure crops, collect taxes, record debts, price merchandise, and complete transactions. Fingers were useful for small numbers, but expanding trade and government required something more dependable. I mean, we only have 10 of those fingers. You run out eventually.
Yeah, that's true. The abacus provided a way to represent numbers physically. Instead of holding every figure in memory, a person could place counters or beads in positions that represented units, tens, hundreds, and larger values too.
Now, how did we count before the abacus? Before there were beads mounted on rods, people used loose objects. Stones, shells, seeds, wooden pieces, and mark sticks could all represent quantities. A shepherd might use one stone for every animal. A merchant might move counters into groups to record merchandise. Eventually, counters were placed on lines scratched into sand, wood, stone, or clay. Each line could represent a different numerical value. One line might represent units, another's tens, and another still hundreds.
So the earliest abacus was not necessarily the framed object that we're used to today.
Chandler, you're correct. The word can refer broadly to a counting board as well as to the later bead and frame device. The Smithsonian notes the instrument may have originated in the ancient Middle East, probably Persia or Samaria, but its exact beginning remains uncertain. Greeks and Romans also used counting boards, and medieval European merchants later used similar reckoning tables.
Yeah, this physical arrangement solved an important problem. A written symbol does not automatically tell someone how to calculate with it. A counting board allows the user to move quantities, exchange 10 units for 110, or break 100 into 10 groups of 10.
So, in other words, Dr. Weaver, it made place value something that a person could touch and move. It was tangible.
Yeah, that's a really accurate way to put it. That is still one of the abacus's strongest educational features.
We often hear that the abacus was invented in China, but that's not completely right, is it, Dr. Deneen?
No, nor is it completely wrong. It's too simple. China developed one of the most influential forms of the abacus, but counting boards existed elsewhere long before the familiar Chinese bead frame became widespread. The ancient Near East, Greece, and Rome all had counting devices. China later developed the sunpan. Europe continued using counting boards. Japan developed the soroban, and Russia produced another form commonly called the shatki. Scholars do not agree whether all these forms came from one original parent device or whether some developed independently. The general concept is simple enough that several societies could have created comparable tools in response to similar needs.
When we ask who invented the abacus, The best answer is that ancient people gradually developed it. There's no verified individual inventor and no single moment of invention.
And the reason for developing it was practical rather than theoretical.
Very much so, Chandler. Governments needed to calculate taxes, what else is new, and distribute resources. Merchants had to add prices, subtract payments, convert weights, and keep their accounts. Builders needed measurements. Astronomers and calendar makers had to perform repeated calculations.
Yeah, the abacus was useful because it was inexpensive, reusable, portable, and required no ink or paper. A calculation could be corrected simply by moving the counters. So let's look at some of the major designs because not every abacus works in exactly the same way.
The Chinese sunpan traditionally has rods divided by a horizontal bar. A common design has two beads above the bar and five below it on each rod. Beads above the bar generally represent groups of five, while beads below represent individual units.
That just sounds so confusing.
It does, it really does, Dr. Weaver. Now, the Japanese soroban has a more streamlined design.
Yes, the modern soroban usually has one bead above the bar and four below it. That arrangement fits the decimal system efficiently. Four single unit beads plus one 5-unit bead can represent every digit from 0 to 9.
Yeah, the Russian abacus looks noticeably different. Its beads move horizontally, and it usually has 10 beads on most rows. It does not use the same central dividing bar found on Chinese and Japanese models.
Europe often relied on flat counting boards rather than framed bead devices. Merchants moved metal or wooden counters along marked lines. That practice became so closely associated with business that the word counter eventually came to mean the surface where store transactions take place.
And that makes sense. How wonderful.
And
Mhm.
I actually did not know that before we started this podcast, guys.
Neither did I.
Me either.
What intrigues me is that the Romans also produced portable counting devices with counters moving through grooves. While the specific construction differed, the principle remained consistent. Positions represented values, and moving a counter changed the number.
Now, somebody that looks at an abacus for the very first time might wonder, how do these moving beads become arithmetic?
Each rod or row represents a place value. On one common arrangement, the rightmost column represents units. The next represents tens, followed by hundreds, thousands, and so forth. Suppose you want to show the number 243. You place two hundreds on the hundreds column, four tens on the 10 column, and three units on the unit column.
Addition is performed by adding beads to the appropriate columns. When a column reaches 10, those 10 units are exchanged for one bead in the next column. Subtraction reverses that process.
So, carrying and borrowing are not merely just marks written on paper. No, the user physically performs them.
Yeah, that's right. That can help students understand what carrying and borrowing actually mean. 10 units are not disappearing, they're being reorganized as one 10.
My beloved grandmother used to teach that with a device like an abacus. It's called a manipulative. Trained users can also perform multiplication, division, decimal calculations, and even more advanced operations.
You know, when I was in school, I was also taught how to do multiplication, subtraction, addition, and division on the abacus.
Wow.
It's
Yes,
important to
sir.
remember the abacus does not determine the answer by itself. It records and organizes the steps performed by the operator.
Now, Dr. Dineen, that distinction matters. An electronic calculator completes the arithmetic after numbers and instructions are answered, but an abacus user must understand the operation and manipulate the beads themselves correctly.
For centuries, the abacus and counting board were closely connected to business. A merchant could calculate prices, payments, debts, and currency conversions without using large amounts of writing material. In medieval and Renaissance Europe, professional calculators sometimes worked at special counting tables. Written arithmetic gradually became more common as Hindu Arabic numerals and written calculation methods spread, but counting boards remained familiar for a long time.
Yeah, in parts of Asia and Russia, framed abacuses continued to be used in shops, offices, and schools well into the modern period. They were dependable and could be operated rapidly by an experienced user and without using up electricity, huh?
That's amazing, Dr. Weaver. The abacus also became a classroom tool. In the 19th century, American schools used large numeral frames to demonstrate counting, addition, subtraction, multiplication, and fractions. And some resemble oversized Russian abacuses, so the entire class could see the beads move.
Whoa. That information was supplied by the Smithsonian Institute, by the way.
Yes, it was.
That classroom use continues because the abacus connects an abstract number with a physical quantity. A child does not merely memorize that 7 plus 5 equals 12. No, the child can combine the quantities and see that 10 units must be exchanged for 110, leaving 2 units.
That does not mean every claim about abacus instruction is automatically proven. Research suggests that sustained training can improve arithmetic performance, but broader claims about intelligence, memory, or even general academic achievement depend on the type and length of training and should be treated cautiously.
Some advanced students eventually calculate without touching a physical abacus. How does that work, Dr. Weaver?
Well, they learn to form a mental image of the device. Instead of moving real beads, they imagine the bead positions and movements. Some users continue making small hand motions while calculating because those movements are connected to the procedures they learned on the physical instrument. I kind of use something like that when I try and think about playing a new piece on the piano. I will often do it and move my fingers as if I
That,
were playing.
You know,
that's
Dr.
very
Weaver, I
interesting.
have actually done the exact same thing.
Yeah.
This method is known as mental abacus calculation. It requires extensive practice. Skilled users can complete rapid arithmetic by manipulating an imagined abacus rather than relying primarily on verbal counting.
That's right, Dr. Dineen, and that helps explain why the abacus is not simply an outdated calculator. It's also a structured method for representing numbers.
Yeah. And the physical device can be especially important when a visual or written method is not the best way for a student to work.
One of the abacus's most important modern uses is in mathematics education for students who are blind or have low vision. Traditional abacuses created a problem for tactile use. A person examining the beads by touch could accidentally move them. The beads could also slide out of position when the device was carried or turned.
By the 1960s, Terence Tim Cranmer, who was blind himself, adapted a Japanese style abacus by adding backing material that created enough friction to hold the beads in place. Brilliant idea. The user could feel and move each bead deliberately without the others sliding accidentally.
That became known as the Cranmer Abacus.
The American Printing House for the Blind tested Cranmer's design with blind students in 1962 and began listing the Cranmer Abacus in its catalog in 1963. The stabilized beads allowed a calculation to remain in place even when the device was moved or stored.
Now,
Wow.
that came from the American Printing House for the Blind, by the way.
Yes,
Yeah. Yeah. For a blind student, the Cranmer abacus could serve a function comparable to pencil and paper calculation for a sighted student. It helps the student keep track of numbers, place values, carrying, borrowing, and intermediate results.
And it is not simply giving the student an answer, is
No,
it?
no, 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 no. The student still performs the arithmetic. The abacus provides an accessible way to record and manipulate numbers. Educational resources for blind students specifically distinguish it from a calculator because the operator must complete each mathematical step.
Now, I want to get into something here that is kind of special to me, learning mathematics through touch.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, sir. How early can a blind child begin using an abacus?
Instruction can begin with basic ideas such as one-to-one correspondence, counting, grouping, and comparing quantities. A beginning device may use only a few rods. As a student develops stronger numerical skills, instruction can move towards the full Cranmer abacus.
students can then learn addition, subtraction, multiplication, division, fractions, decimals, and calculating money. More advanced mathematics may also involve braille notation, tactical diagrams, accessible software, and talking calculators.
Oh, yes. So the abacus is part of a larger collection of accessible mathematics tools.
Yeah, so it's not expected to replace every other method. A student might use an abacus for computation, Braille for recording equations, tactile graphics for geometry, and accessible technology for graphing or more complicated scientific work.
Its value is independence. The student can set up a problem, carry out the operation, check the bead positions, and reach an answer without depending on someone else to read the printed page or describe a visual display.
It also gives the student direct contact with place value. A digit is not merely spoken aloud, its position can be located and examined through touch.
I just think that's wonderful and amazing.
I think it is too,
Um,
Dr. Weaver.
yeah, organizations such as the American Printing House for the Blind and schools serving blind students continue to provide abacus materials and instruction. The device remains relevant even when accessible electronic calculators are available because it teaches how arithmetic works rather than only producing an answer.
And that comes from the Perkins School for the Blind, by the way.
An excellent institution. The electronic calculator replaced the abacus in most offices and businesses, but it did not eliminate it. The device survived because it continued to serve educational, cultural, and accessibility purposes.
It also has advantages that are easy to overlook. It requires no battery, no software, no internet connection, or no screen. A well made abacus can remain usable for decades.
Yeah, more importantly, it exposes the structure of arithmetic. It shows place value, regrouping, and numerical relationships in a way that a digital display usually really does not.
Its history also challenges the idea that computing began with electronics. Long before mechanical adding machines and computers, people designed systems that allowed information to be stored, changed, and processed according to rules.
And the beads do not perform the thinking, but they do help organize it.
And that may be the best way to understand the abacus. It was created because people needed a practical method for handling numbers. It evolved through the work of many cultures rather than one known inventor. Today, it remains a useful teaching device and an important tool for mathematical independence among blind and visually impaired students.
An ancient calculating method continues to serve a valuable modern purpose.
Yes, it does. And sometimes the oldest technology remains useful because the basic human problem has not changed.
Hey, listen, thanks a bunch for tuning in today to Things You Don't Know. Please return for another episode. And remember, hey, we need your likes. We want your comments. And we do need your subscriptions too. So please join us on our
Yeah,
adventure.
yes, and we hope you've learned something from this episode of Things You Don't Know. And be sure to come back soon, folks.
Many great things coming.